Welcome to Guest of the Year. I'm the host. My name's Mike. This is the last episode of the main tournament of Season 2. We're going to take a short break, probably a month or two, and then we'll come back with the Tournament of Champions and also hopefully a couple special episodes that I won't spoil. I want to thank everyone for sticking with the show this long. That's a lot of Guest of the Year. Now 62 episodes in. I really, really appreciate everyone following along and enabling us to grow the way we have. And on that note, we are doing a Guest of the Year live version in Las Vegas on May 18th and May 25th at Brooklyn Bowl, Las Vegas. So the first 2 Saturdays of the Sphere run from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., although you can get there as early as noon to get a table. Why would you want a table? Good question. It's going to be bar trivia style, so you can come with a team or join a team, come alone, join a team, and I'm going to play a track, and then everyone's going to huddle up and decide on a year. Whichever team gets the most years correct over 10 songs wins prizes. The songs are going to get harder and harder and shorter as time goes on and worth more and more points. So it'll be really exciting, really fun. Again, it's at Brooklyn Bowl, so it's tons of great food, great drinks. It's a 7-minute walk to the Sphere from there. But again, it'll be over by 3 p.m., so you have another 4 hours to kind of work your way to the Sphere, hit a few shakedowns. Downstairs is the fan art event. So we're going to be upstairs in the L bar. I will post signs directing up there, but you'll find it. It is a free event and you don't need to RSVP, just show up. But yeah, that's what's going on. If you are not going to Vegas, but you know a friend who is, please let them know. And if you are coming, shoot me an email and let me know. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just excited to see people who have been on the show, listen to the show, who have emailed me. For more information on the event, you can go to guestoftheyear.net. There's all the information you need. Guestoftheyear.net is linked in the show notes. This week's setlist curator is Davis Schneiderman. Davis is a professor of English at Lake Forrest College, executive director of the Krebs Center for the Humanities, and principal investigator of a $1.2 million Mellon Foundation grant called Human about AI in the humanities. Davis is currently working on a project spanning the Las Vegas Sphere, the Grateful Dead, and artificial intelligence. Welcome, Davis.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This week's prize pack is once again generously provided by Green Mountain Bluegrass and Roots Festival in Manchester, Vermont. The festival is promoted by former contestant John alongside his wife Jill. The annual festival features a variety of bluegrass, roots, and Americana music from both icons of the industry and innovative up-and-coming artists. Featuring multiple stages, camping, local food trucks, Vermont craft wine and beer, all in a magical Green Mountain setting. Again, if you want to go back and listen to John explain the festival way better than I just did, check out 4/15/24. The festival takes place from August 15th through August 18th, and tickets are available now via the link in the show notes. Thank you again, John and Jill. All right, here's how the game works. We'll play the first part of a Grateful Dead live track, and each contestant will use the messaging system to silently guess which year the performance is from. Contestants who are all on a video conference together can message in their guesses at any time during the clip or in the 10 seconds after it concludes. Whoever is furthest from the correct year is eliminated. The last 2 deadheads standing will hear 3 tracks, and whoever is closest to the correct years in aggregate wins. We've got our returning champ CJ here with us, and we'll meet the rest of the deadheads in a moment, but first, without further ado, the Grateful Dead. The guesses are in. It was Loser at the Hollywood Bowl on June 17th, 1972. Davis, tell us about that pick.
I pick this Loser specifically because June 17, 1972, when the Dead were playing this, is the night of the Watergate break-in. That's when it happened. G. Gordon Liddy and the other 4 break into the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee, and that's the beginning of Nixon's downfall, all the Woodward and Bernstein stuff. So I thought Loser would be an appropriate one for that. And I liked it for that reason. I teach a course on the Grateful Dead and American culture at Lake Forest College, and we do a lot of that, linking the period of time that the band played to interesting moments in American history.
So there's lots of debate over whether the Dead were political. Where do you land on that?
It's so interesting because they were political in sort of an apolitical space. You know, when they come out of that merry prankster tradition, they're more like, you know, the yippies or the type of people who want to disrupt by kind of, you know, radically messing with things. So the shtick about we're not political at all, I don't entirely buy it, but they're only explicitly political a couple times, like in New Speedway Boogie, something like that. That's directly about Altamont. But if you're around for all of this time and you become bigger and bigger as a kind of corporate entity, it's inevitable that you are political simply by the way you're interacting with concert venues, with police. So I think it's a bit of a pose to say we're not. I think part of the mythology, right, is that, you know, to be tune in, turn on, drop out, is that you're supposed to say it's a sucker's game to care about politics, right? You're doing it wrong. That's the whole Ken Kesey thing. Don't be against the war. Don't participate in the discourse around the war. And because Jerry was, of course, so non-confrontational and didn't want to take any particular positions, it fit that mindset. But you know, is somebody like Phil a person who didn't have strong political beliefs? Of course he did, and I'm sure they all did as well. It's inevitable. But I think part of the bus ride was to maintain this sense of just we're something else. You come to us to be elsewhere, to be outside of the rest of it. But I think that's a bit of an illusion.
Thanks, Davis. And great pick. Two people were closest, CJ and Ross. They're both on in the next round. Let's go to our returning champ, CJ. He's 50 from Toledo, Ohio. Why 71, CJ?
Well, I did not hear any keys, so when I get the T-shirt, I'll still be asking that question. And I thought for a minute I heard, you know, a couple maybe double hits of drums, but obviously I didn't. So I thought, well, maybe it was, you know, right there towards the end before Mickey kind of left the band there for that 4 or 5 year period. So that's just where I put it.
Right on, CJ. Nice work. Ross was also 1 year off, 71. You're also on the next round, Ross. Ross is 51 from Larkspur, California, just right by the Grateful Dead's old haunts. Tell us why 71.
I definitely, 90% sure I heard one drummer. I wouldn't have put it at 72 because there's like an edginess to Jerry's guitar, like a waveriness that I associate more with like 69, 70, 71. It gets a little cleaner maybe in 72. So yeah, that one caught me off guard. It sounded like a 71 to me. I agree. I didn't hear any keyboards. Like that threw me off too.
Right on, Ross. Also going on the next round is Pete. He guessed 78. Skelly guessed 82.
Oh.
Pete is 51 from Woodbury, Connecticut. Why 78, Pete?
You know, I heard no keyboard, so I just assumed Keith was not with us. And I couldn't clearly pick up the drummers that well. So I started going on Jerry's guitar, which has a bit more of a raw edge in 78. It starts to be a little bit rougher. Phil's bass was pretty prominent, and that I associate with a little bit more like 78, 77, but 77 has its own thing, right? And then time was up and I was like, I don't know, 78. So it's a lot of just feel for me. 37 years of listening to this band ought to count for something in the end, I hope. So we're going to find out.
Well, it got you on to the next round. Skelly is from Santa Monica. Skelly guessed 82. Talk to us, Skelly.
Yeah, so let's see, the notes I wrote down were early 80s. I wrote Phil. I put Jerry's Searing guitar, so it made me think 83 for a second. I thought I heard two drummers. Those are the only notes I wrote down. I really couldn't make out anything in it. I was just like kind of trying to settle into what I could hear. I really wasn't able to tell. I find that as I listen to the show all the time, audience recordings, and that may have been a matrix, I'm not sure, but audience recordings are really challenging for me, like super. And also my heart was racing very fast. So that's really all I got.
Well, Skelly, tell us how you got into the Dead.
So I got into the Dead probably like around 86, 87-ish or so. I think in 87 I had, a blank tape. One side was American Beauty, and the other side was, I think, like the best of the Allman Brothers Band. And I wore that out. I had a few people in my life. It was at summer camp in upstate New York. And a few people were very much into the band. My only real exposure to the band from childhood was probably driving to visit my grandmother up in Binghamton along Route 17. There's a rock face that has what I now know is a steal your face. Someone like airbrushed it very bad, steely. But I remember as a kid driving off with my dad and seeing that, and kind of like it struck me in some way. And I mean, I've listened to all sorts of music over the course of my life. If I continue to, nothing consistently and as deeply moves me in every which way possible as the Grateful Dead music in all the ways, and it always will. I got turned on. There were some people around me who were listening to live recordings, listened to some live recordings. I didn't get to see the band live until 89, but then I saw them through the end several dozen times and got to see Jerry Garcia Band about a half dozen times as well. There's nothing like it. I was leaving the office to come back to my home and got in the car and like threw on Sirius and was literally driving down, or as fast as you can drive in LA, driving down the street and woo-hooing out the window. It was a Scarlet Fire transition, and I guessed it right. It was 78. But the point is, I was literally just, exclaiming words or not words the whole way. And I'm so happy and excited. And that joy, I just think, I don't know that everybody gets to experience that. And that is something that is so much regularly a part of my experience with this band, this music. So I will put my pride away and listen for the rest of the show, because I love this show. It's so much fun. So now I'll just have like a live spot on stage. So I wish you guys all well. And I thank you all for the opportunity to be here.
Well, thank you, Skelly. Before you go, you and I both live in LA. I've had the pleasure of meeting you and your buddies, your lifelong buddies. Could you talk a little bit about the symbiotic relationship between the Dead and your group of lifelong friends?
Well, my friends and people in general are probably that. People, nature are like the main thing, music that move me. I happen to have a great group of longtime 40+ year friends. And I was thinking about this actually on the way over here, because the one time I was exposed to the show was with some of these friends. And coming here tonight without my friends, but new friends. And I thought in that car ride, like, okay, cool. Like I kind of acknowledge that part of this. And so there's nothing like the Grateful Dead or the Grateful Dead concert and all that stuff. But I found that my excitement here was to do this, to listen to Grateful Dead music, to talk about it with people who care about it as much as I do. And again, going to that uniqueness of what the experience is to be a Deadhead. My friends are undoubtedly and forever will be part of that. And it's even there with strangers. And I think, Mike, that even the moment we got together in person, boom, it's like there's an instant kinship and an honoring of spirit that is just kind of present for me in my experience with this band and participating with it. So this show is a great extension of that in my eyes.
Beautifully said, Skelly, and a high compliment, and I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Pete, CJ, and Ross are on the next round. David says another great pick.
See how everything freedom to this day, and it's just like any other day that's ever been. Sun going up and then the sun get going down. Shine through my window and my friends stay.
The guesses are in. A lovely Black Peter at Ventura County Fairgrounds in Ventura, California on June 12th, 1987. Davis, tell us about that one.
Well, first, I had even forgotten how lovely that segment is. We were all getting a little locked into it. I could see Skelly even quietly just totally in the zone, which was awesome and inspiring. So I picked this one for another kind of American history reason. This is June 12th, 1987. And the day this is happening is the day Ronald Reagan famously says in Berlin, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." Right? So it's the middle of that period of time. I was a kid, and I remember feeling the end of the Cold War pretty keenly. We would do those drills in school where you sit on the ground, severe weather drills, but they're really in case a nuclear bomb is dropped. There's that Sting song, "I hope the Russians love their children too." All of that. But there's something about the feeling that it would just go on forever. But there's something about that bridge, right? Every day is like the day before. Nothing will ever change. But of course, the power of that moment is the change itself. And Black Peter was one of the songs I had a hard time when I was young really getting into. I just didn't connect with it. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't feel it because I think I had to live a little more and confront some aspects of my own mortality. But I think I picked it here because this moment, this important moment where it seems like these two spheres of influence will always be locked in this eternal battle with each other. That changes within a couple of years. The wall really does come down, right? And that bridge is that moment of like escape. It's like a line of flight. Like something is always possible in that moment. And that's why I love that song so much now.
So that song examines mortality, and you're examining humanity and AI and the Grateful Dead via your Human project. And I know you'll be at the Sphere this summer. Going in, what are you looking to investigate?
So I'm also, I should mention, a William Burroughs scholar is the other person that I work on. And I do quite a bit of stuff on Burroughs. And if you know anything about him, he was really fascinated with the way that you could use technology to influence people, sort of to fight the forces of post-war control. But I was just recently rereading the electrochoate acid test and reminded of all the recording equipment and the projections and the sounds in the acid test. And what is all of that if not, the beginning of the Sphere? The Sphere, from one perspective, is this like amazing, was it a $1.8 billion venue with the biggest AI visualizer in the world, right? These screens. I don't think there's anything like this. And it's probably the future of entertainment. If you want to look at it skeptically, it's this like immense, late capitalist cash grab that people are upset about for all sorts of, legitimate reasons. But if you think about a band like the Dead, who seem, for people who don't know them that well, to not be that connected to technology, that's completely wrong, right? Because all these people who helped build the internet were deadheads. All of the file sharing, all of the tape trading, all of the interest in technology in Garcia's guitars, and even going back to the way that the acid tests could play with your consciousness. It's all about like using the technology. So I can't predict what Jerry Garcia, were he alive, would really think, but I wouldn't be surprised if he'd be really jazzed by the Sphere, right? And the possibilities of it as well. It doesn't mean it's all good, and it doesn't mean it's all bad. And we're in this kind of AI hype cycle right now. I don't know how many of you are dealing with it in your own jobs or careers or just in your life, but basically we can't leave it just to coders or to big tech firms to tell us how this is going to influence our lives. The only way we can understand it is if we think about the history. How did we get here, right? It's the ideas of the humanist Renaissance. Free will, individuality that lead us to make something like ChatGPT. If we were living in a medieval theocracy, we wouldn't build something like that. Nobody wakes up in the year 800 AD, earlier than medieval, and says, am I happy today? Did I follow my feelings? Did I talk to my therapist? Like all the things that we do now are very much contingent on the time that we're in. And so My point is that we made this technology based upon our values. And when the technology gets better and better and makes better songs, right? Writes better novels, which could happen 2 months from now or 2 years from now. Is it going to need humans in the same way? Are we going to still value the same things that we value? And I'll add one more thing. We all get a lot of pleasure from listening to the Dead. I could see it when we were listening to that because we have all this associations, decades of associations with it. But it's not really Black Peter that's bringing us pleasure. There's something happening in our brain that's turned on. So if science through synthetic biology could figure out how to just push those pieces in your brain, do you even really need the song? Maybe in the future, we're all going to have super personalized songs. And I think that collective experience of going to a concert or hearing the Dead or being at the Sphere is going to become really important in the future in ways that we don't even yet understand. Sorry, that was a little much.
No,
Right.
that was really
Mind
cool.
blowing.
I want to take your class, Davis.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm like, this is awesome.
Jesus. Incredible. Thank you, Davis. Pete and Ross got 87 exactly. They're on to the final. CJ gets to 89. Ross, why 87?
I mean, everyone on this show always says go with your gut, and that was the first thing that came to me. The music sounded stronger. I would have gone earlier, but I didn't hear the Jerry Kermit the Frog thing he had going in like 83, 84, 85. So I just was like, I'm going to just plant my flag at 87. So that's probably somewhere in the middle is the first thing that came to me. I tend to, with 80s songs, 87 is the first year I started seeing them. So I tend to, if I can't really come up with something, I'll plant my flag there. So a little bit of that too.
Nice work. You're on in the finals. Way to go. And Pete, also 87.
Yeah, I was starting to lean later at first, and just based on the harmonizing, was really strong harmonizing going on. And then, Jer was isolated for a minute there, and his voice was really strong. And there was a period there when he got healthy, post coma and everything. I don't know. I was stuck somewhere between 86 and 89, and I was like, I'm going to do 87. Got kind of lucky, I guess, in the end.
Nice work, Pete. CJ, our returning champ. Hard luck 89 there, CJ. Very reasonable guess. Why 89?
Well, I had almost the same thoughts as Pete. I thought that the vocals sounded really strong, for Jerry, obviously, harmonizing with Brent. And so right away, I thought either 87 post coma or 89. I could picture either one just clearly in my head. Then at first I thought, well, maybe I could split him with 88. And I thought, it could be 90. Shit. So I just kind of went, okay, 89, I'm just sticking with it. So that's where I went there. So good work, guys. And great work, Davis. That was awesome. I feel like I got like the best two curators, 2 weeks in a row, got basically professors of Grateful Deadology.
Yeah, great run here. CJ, what's on the ornithology docket?
Well, right now we're doing raptor surveys in Ten Sleep Canyon, which is a really popular climbing area. So we're trying to see which ledges are being occupied with nests, peregrine falcons, golden eagles especially, but any birds of prey or any nests that we find, we're documenting them. And then Forest Service can post a closure so people don't disturb the birds. So that's really what's going on immediately. And then later on down the road, I'll be up on the mountain once everything melts off and doing sagebrush bird surveys up there, which is a lot of fun. Starts before dawn. You can start even before sunrise, as soon as there's enough light to see. And then you hike to points that you have on your GPS and you do bird surveys by ear and by sight. So everything that you see, Davis said, are you experiencing, or maybe some of you guys are experiencing AI type technology in your jobs? And so I know last week Jason mentioned the Merlin app that you can get now on your iPhone and record a bird song and get a pretty good identification on what that bird is, even if you never see it. So that technology is creeping in all around. But fortunately, I guess I'm maybe late in my era of people who can still do those jobs and, get out in the field and hike around. And as soon as, the bird show's over, then I put on, my headphones or some music in the truck and listen to Grateful Dead, kind of like Skelly was saying, on the drive out, just blast it and grin from ear to ear.
Yeah, maybe AI can decipher the species of bird, but it can't find the nest. presuming that they're high in the tree, what do you use, binoculars and walk around looking up?
Well, in the case of in a canyon, we're mainly looking for cliff nesting birds. So they're up on the face of a cliff, and sometimes you can spot some whitewash, which is basically poop, right? That they kind of eject it over the edge, and it washes down a little bit. You can sometimes spot sticks, especially for golden eagle, and then you might see birds going in and out of a certain area, and so you focus on that area. But in the case of sagebrush, the only way you find nests is you're walking from one point to the next. Sometimes you'll see a bird flush from right in front of you, right almost under your foot. So you stop, before taking any more steps, and you look all around. And I think last summer I found 7 or 8 nests that way.
Cool. If you found like your Moby Dick of birds or let's say you found you just have a good discovery that day and you get back in your truck, what dead song are you throwing on for a triumphant ride home?
So my wife is from California. I've been to California many times, and I've seen most of the birds California has had to offer. One that I have consistently just missed on every single time is the mountain quail. And there's the California quail, or they call it the valley quail out there, and then there's the mountain quail. So even though it's not a California quail, but it would probably be in California that I found it, I put on estimated profit. California.
All right. It's
and then bird song.
Yeah.
I think Bobby wrote that after seeing a California quail at a show.
There you have it. CJ, it's been a total
awesome.
pleasure having you on the show, and I'm excited to have you back for the Tournament of Champions.
I look forward to it. Thank you, and thanks everybody. Good luck.
All right, Pete and Ross are on to the finals. 3 songs. Whoever is lowest in aggregate over the 3 tracks of Davis's choosing wins the Green Mountain Bluegrass and Roots Festival prize pack. Let's hear the first track of the finals.
Well, if your life is going around in circles like that infernal machine, the only solution is to join us here next week, same time. Till then, good night.
Night. Transportation arrangements provided by Sabina Airlines. Europe begins in Brussels, and Sabina flies here every day.
The guesses are in. It was Turn On Your Love Light on January 18th, 1969. Davis.
So a couple years ago during the pandemic, when I needed something to do, I decided to write a book proposal for those 33 1/3 books, those tiny books about albums. And I did one on Live Dead. They didn't pick it, but that was like the first album that really spoke to me. And as I was doing my research for it, I came across this gem. This is around the time of the recording of Live Dead. And so at the Popular Culture Association Grateful Dead Studies Conference a couple weeks ago, I presented a paper with my co-author, Richard Pettengill, who I teach the class with, great performer and musicologist, about the Dead going on Playboy After Dark. What a weird thing, because it's a clash of these 2 distinct countercultures, right? You've got Hefner's empire, which is already pretty significant, promoting sexual freedom, political equality. He's a big civil rights supporter and kind of a hip lifestyle. And then you've got the Dead's collective consciousness expansion project. This comes at a time when the Dead owe a lot of money to Warner Brothers, and also where Hefner is trying to be relevant and hip with the kids. What happens in the show is really interesting. You can find different clips of it. The Dead are only on for like 12 minutes, but the whole show is 48 minutes, and the astrologist Sidney Omar is on. Remember the guy who would do horoscopes in the newspaper? He gives Hefner like this crazy reading that makes Hefner extremely uncomfortable. Sid Caesar is on doing a ridiculous series of accents that he could never get away with today. And the whole thing is like you're in a living room. It's in CBS Studio City, but you're invited because you can have the Playboy lifestyle. This can be a thing that you can achieve if you just sort of learn from Hugh Hefner. Now, why would the Dead go on this thing? They certainly wanted the exposure. And there's this myth that somebody in the Dead's team dosed the coffee urn. So by the time you get the love light at the end of the show, the story goes that everybody is tripping. Kreutzmann talks about it on Conan O'Brien when his memoir Deal came out, and the story is in there. But I think the story, as does Richard, is BS. There's no evidence from anyone connected with the program that this ever happened. And so I believe this is part of that myth making. It's like a way for the band to save face about going on this thing that seems to be not in the wheelhouse of what they care about or what they do. Like, we turned on the squares, that's the way to do it. And Jerry has a really interesting, like, series of performance vibes on the thing. He's kind of there in a Guatemalan poncho. He's talking to some of the guests about the two drummers, making these kind of arch comments about they're here for mutual annihilation, like the snake eating its own tail, the Ouroboros. And then he's really animated. Jerry is not always that animated on stage. And in this, if you watch it, he's kind of doing all these moves. They're not exactly rock star moves, but compared to what he normally does, they're pretty animated. And I think he's either having a little fun with the performance or thinking maybe this is a chance to get some new fans. Hard to know. But at the end, when Hefner says something like, if you're on the infernal machine, come with us, that's like his signal to the audience that, like, I get what this is and you at home can get what this is. But don't worry, you don't really have to stay with the Grateful Dead any longer. Just come back next week when I have another guest on. And he had a lot of interesting guests. But I just think it's just cool smash of different things happening. And are you ever going to hear Pigpen with a commercial, on top for a travel agency or whatever it is? It's just great. Everything about it is great.
Yeah, I've seen that full clip, and the way Jerry talks to Hugh Hefner is the way he would later on talk to guys like Letterman. Just wry, deeply funny. What was he doing to protect himself from these corporate appearances? Was it just plain irony?
It's irony. It's like, I know what this is and I know what you want me to say, and I'm going to be charming enough that you like me, but I'm going to be arch enough that I'm going to try and subvert it. At one point, Hefner says, well, looks like your band's ready. Would you do a song for us? And Jerry goes, absolutely not. Right. And then, of course, he plays this kind of almost like medieval madrigal troubadour version of Mountains of the Moon, where it's just him and TC. Bobby's off to the side with maybe a 12 string. You can't quite see him. But it's almost like a strange choice, too, just to showcase the two of them. Then they do St. Stephen, which gets cut. And then finally at the end, in this almost like, dance off, you've got Love Light. But during St. Stephen, I should say one more thing. In an attempt for Hefner's production to be hip, they project onto the screen a dancer like flitting in and out, an overlay on top of St. Stephen, sort of like this is what it is to be a hippie. And it may be one of the dancers who's on at the end of the program. It's really difficult to tell, but it's so like almost comically bad and almost like what a CBS executive would think that this counterculture is about, but also really interesting too.
Yeah, I'll put the full video in the show notes. It's on archive. Both these guys were hot on your trail. They both guessed 69. Nice poll, guys. Pete, tell us about 69.
So right away, I knew we were late 60s. And then I heard the advertisement or whatever it is from the program. I'm familiar with this Playboy After Dark episode, which is just utterly hilarious. And I highly recommend anyone to just Google it and find it. I love to hold on to the myth that they're dosed, and I'm going to keep living in that fantasy world. I think it's just the idea of Hef with his pipe and his jacket, like, totally spun is hilarious.
Awesome. Ross, you also pulled a 69. Nice work. Why 69?
I was in the same boat. I typed 69, then I typed 70, then I typed 60. I mean, literally backing over it. Just like, I knew what it was, and it felt like a 60s thing. And I think that I finally was like, does this sound enough tonally like Live Dead? Yes, it does. It's 1969, and I'm just going to live with that. But thanks for bursting the bubble there, Davis. You just like killed Santa Claus on that one. But
Yeah, exactly.
Ross, you're at ground zero for the Dead in Marin. How did you get into the band?
yeah, my dad grew up in the city. He was in the city in the late '60s, so he had seen Dead, Hendrix, that kind of stuff. When I don't think that was his scene necessarily, but I remember probably when I was 8 seeing is it Dead Ahead? What was the movie that came out with that had the acoustic half and the electric half? And all I really remember is the drum sequence. It's all like orange, and there's people like in this giant cage playing drums, and I think that kind of stuck with me a bit. But probably around 12, I was just getting into like classic rock and stuff, and then once I started hearing the Dead, I don't know, it just musically it instantly hit. I think Europe 72 hit me really hard. It's still probably the album, like physical album, that I've listened to more than anything in my life. There's something about finding something that really hits with you and then realizing that it's like a bottomless well. There's no end to the stories, to the narrative arc, to the music. There's something very appealing about that, especially in the mid 80s when it was kind of, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's very, synthy and MTV and stuff. I don't know. It felt like a very, very deep well. And I think that really resonated with me. First concert I ever went to was Dylan and the Dead at Oakland Coliseum in '87. Probably saw the Dead 50-ish times, another 15, 20 Jerry shows. It was easier here, right? I mean, you're kind of, like you said, ground zero. I went to college in Santa Cruz. I was never that far from a 4-night run at Oakland Coliseum or Shoreline. My Dead story is a little different in that I think you've had a lot of people on the show talk about, I was a Hesher, I was into metal, I was a skate kid, I was into punk, and then I turned. And mine was actually the opposite. I'm going to go, if you don't mind, if you have a minute here, I'll go a little negative. I was 20, 21 in college. We had tickets to see the Dead when they were doing the Veneta 20-year anniversary in the summer '92, and Jerry got sick again. And I think it sort of caused me to have this re-evaluation of like, is this working for me? I'm young and feeling energetic, and they're not. And there was a part of me that was like, man, they're really going through the motions a little bit. I'm not knocking anyone who loves the 80s, loves the 90s, all that. I'm not knocking anyone's personal experience, but I was there just for the music. I wasn't there for Shakedown Street. I'm not anti-drugs. That just wasn't what I was there for. I was trying to get close enough to see Jerry, to see his hands, to see Phil, to see what he's doing, what he's playing. And I think it got to the point where it's like, man, we're celebrating a dark star that was bad. Or Jerry looked up during this show. I was like, and I wrote it down on my set list. And I think at some point and that was probably the final nail in that coffin for me, was when he was sick and those shows got canceled. We went and did something else. Like we went on like a road trip, and I ended up seeing a bunch of the shows in like December '92. I think maybe my last show ever was it's a Dick's Picks 12/16/92. And I listened to that, and it's like, this isn't interesting to me. And again, I'm not knocking anyone's experience, but I think that really, I just felt like I'm young and there are energetic bands out there, and I'm playing music. I was a guitar player, bass player. And after that, I went pretty much cold turkey for like 10 years. And I was in bands, I was playing music, but playing punk-ish replacements type stuff, short songs, loud energy. And that was just, and then I ended up in a group of friends probably in my 20s that none of them listened to the Dead. Like that was growing up, Deadheads everywhere. Santa Cruz, Deadheads everywhere, and people that really hated the Dead. So it was an interesting mix. But post college, I ended up back in San Francisco playing local music scene and playing music a ton and loud and fast. And that was just, I don't know, it felt more energetic. And I really put a pin in it for a long time. It became something that was just for me, probably in my 30s, when I realized, this re-listen and the archive and the Dick's Picks stuff started picking up after they were so stingy with it for a long time. And then it really started flowing. I was like, now I remember how much I love this. And I really got into it again. And I've never gotten back out of it. I mean, they're my favorite band of all time. I think I just needed a break for actually quite some time. I moved to the corner of Haight and Clayton, which is a block from Haight-Ashbury, the weekend that Jerry died. And it was chaos in the Haight. I mean, there were people everywhere, flowers on the street and stuff. And feeling a little cynical now in retrospect, but I think at that point I was like, it just didn't even hit me that hard in a weird way. I'm not proud of that, but I think I had really just moved on for a while. I just needed a break from it because I put so much energy into it for so long and just didn't feel like they were doing the same.
So the band just kind of like personally let you down.
100%. I think that is what it felt like. And I'm older now. I have a better understanding of what they were going through collectively. So again, that was how I felt at 2021. But yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. I did feel let down, and I started thinking like, why am I putting so much into this when they're just playing out the string a little bit? Then you get back into it. It's like, oh, this is actually really meaningful to me, and it's important. And I don't think there's ever been a guitar player on this earth than Jerry Garcia. I mean, I think it really speaks to me. Just needed a break.
Cool, Ross. Love that perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for going too negative. I don't feel like too many.
No,
people
not
do
at
that on
all.
the
Not
show.
at all.
No.
Not at all.
I love that. I love that.
Both these guys are in the same position. They both nailed it. So we're going on the second song of the finals. Let's hear Davis's pick.
Hey, Saturday night. God, we have been heaven forever. It was worth, don't even have a big old party, so you call it planet Earth. But worry about tomorrow, Lord, you know it when it comes. Rock and roll music meets the rising shining sun. Hey, Saturday night. Yeah. One more Saturday night. Hey, Saturday night.
One more Saturday night at Ventura County Fairgrounds on July 13th, 1985. Davis.
So One More Saturday Night is not my favorite song. I'm sort of happy to hear it, but it's rare that I'm going to put it on my own. It's what I class like the B+ material that you can hear A+ versions of. No slam on it. I get it. But I also think about it in a way that like you're almost obligated to play it, right? It has, it calls out the day of the week. And I wonder if that ever became a drag, maybe not. But the reason I chose this one is that July 13th, 1985, while they're doing the show, is the day of Live Aid, that massive concert. And I just kind of wonder what it's like to be the Grateful Dead, this big band that's still kind of off the grid when all the other big bands in the universe, the big 80s pop stars, so, Queen, U2, Madonna, The Who, Sting, Phil Collins, Mick Jagger, Tina Turner, Bob Dylan, I want to get back to Bob Dylan in a minute, are doing this thing. Phil Collins, you may remember, takes a Concorde and plays in both the Wembley Stadium, and then he flies and plays in Philadelphia. Think about the carbon, that was spent on that. Remember how big Phil Collins was? Like, he was huge. You couldn't escape him. And I don't know if I should admit this or not. I'm not like a big solo Phil Collins fan, but I really like Genesis, and I like Phil Collins Genesis too. I'll go back and listen to that sometimes. But again, this is before the Dead pop, before Touch of Grey, before they really enter like a different kind of space. And I just think, were they even aware of it? Were they thinking about it? Was anybody at their show aware that Live Aid was going on? I don't know the answer to any of that. And then I thought, was there anybody at Live Aid who was in the kind of Dead's orbit? And it's really only Bob Dylan, right? I mean, they play with Dylan, of course, and are an influence on Dylan. Dylan says something a little controversial at Live Aid. He makes some sort of statement, I'm paraphrasing, that is like, it's great to raise all this money for Africa, but I hope we're going to use some of it to pay the mortgages of American farmers. And Bob Geldof is like furious that Dylan has misunderstood what this thing is about. But I don't know if this is true or not, but it's supposedly that statement that causes Willie Nelson to start Farm Aid, Live Aid, Farm Aid. And obviously that loops back. I think Bob Weir was at the most recent Farm Aid, if I remember. I watched the live stream a couple months ago. So there's also like this sort of like alternative thing, embedded within the larger thing. And I just find it all really interesting. It's another like clash of cultures in a way, different than Playboy After Dark. But again, this big concert's going on, and here we are. It's another One More Saturday Night.
Thank you, Davis. Ross guessed 90 and Pete guessed 85. So Pete got it exactly. Pete, tell us about 85. That's a hell of a poll.
to be honest, what gives it away is Phil drops a bomb that distorts at the end. You hear this boom, right? And I never forget getting a tape when I was 15 years old from these deadheads I really looked up to who built my collection. And I remember him handing me 630-85, and he says, "Whatever you do, turn down the bass when this shakedown opens." And to this day, I mean, 630-85 is a pretty legendary shakedown. If you don't know it, go listen to it, listeners out there. But Phil dropped some heavy duty bombs early, and they distort just like that. And right away, I was like, 630-85. That's like, I'm going to go 85 on this and see what happens.
Love a good Phil bass pull. Ross, 90.
I should have, if I was playing the game, I should have just said like 87. I should have just gone in the middle because I got a little torn. It was Saturday Night Stuff because Bob's a ham always. And so then you're trying to find like what's the hammiest Bob era, but it's like that song is just ham all the way from 71 onwards. So I just thought some of Jerry's guitar sounded a little on the weaker side, maybe. So I put it a little later, but it was a stab in the dark. I don't know. I should have played the game and just picked something a little more in the middle of what I was thinking.
Right on. Well, Pete takes a 5-track lead going to the third song. But first, Pete, how did you get into the Dead?
Like a lot of people, I had an older sibling who went away to college. She went away to college in Vermont and came home with, some Dead albums. And I was in 7th grade, something like that. And I looked up to her, of course, because older sibling. I was the youngest of 5. And I was looking at these Grateful Dead albums, and it was like, American Beauty, and just looking at the cover art going, wow, what is this? And I'm like, Grateful Dead. And I hadn't really heard of them. By then, at that time, I was listening to a lot of like, Zeppelin, Van Halen, stuff like that, right? And I was like, what is this? Is this like metal? You know what I mean? Like with that kind of name. And I put it on, and I remember just thinking, this is like really strange music at the time. Anyway, I go on. She gets tickets to see Dylan and the Dead, 7/10/87, what's behind me in this photo, at JFK Stadium in Philly. So just like Ross, same era. Some might call us touch heads, but I take issue with that. But anyway, so go to that show, and I'm a 14-year-old like suburban kid from North Jersey in the middle of this. It was like stepping through a portal, right, into another parallel universe that you didn't know existed. So I was enamored by it. My other sister who was with us too was totally turned off by it. Hey, whatever. So that's her loss. And so fast forward, I talked about the guy who gave me tapes, that 630-85 tape, and they worked at the 7-Eleven, and me and my buddy would go there and drop off 10 Maxell XL2 tapes, come back with them filled up with tapes. These guys built our collection and like really mentored us, through this. I will never forget coming in. They go, hey, we cleaned out our collection. Here's 30 tapes. And to them, they were like B quality, but to us, they were just, it was like pure gold. So then, next shows I saw were, 88, I caught a show at MSG. That was probably like the first show I went into, like really knowing the music. And again, just Madison Square, I've seen probably 100 shows in Madison Square Garden in my life. And so just like the energy in the place blew me away. Just there's nothing quite like the Grateful Dead there. So when I got to graduate high school and really could go out, I just started devouring as much Dead as I could. A lot of summer 91, fall 91. I caught those Brantford shows at MSG and probably saw like 6 of those shows, and just anyway, kind of all fed from there. And then as we got down the road, and it's interesting what Ross said, because I had a similar experience. I did most of like 93 spring, summer, fall tours, like did a lot of those shows. And by the end of the fall, I remember the Boston Garden shows there, and it was just like, I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, this band is not tight. This is really loose. What am I actually chasing? Why am I here? Another band had entered my life about a year earlier in 92. I started seeing Fish, and I was like, these guys are half the price and they're bringing the heat every night, and they're on point every night. Now, that end of 93, I, caught some Fish shows that really turned me on. And I was just like, this is it. And I kind of just stopped at that point, really seeing the Dead. I saw a couple shows in 94. And the last show I saw was in 95. And I had $20 to my name. And I felt for some reason drawn to go. I went solo to the show on a lark, bought a case of beer, sold it on the lot, turned it over into a ticket to buy, go into the show. It was a terrible show. It was a giant stadium, but they did play Unbroken Chain. So I felt fulfilled in some way and that was the last time I saw them. I didn't like having my memories of them seeing, Jerry with the teleprompters and that kind of stuff was kind of a bad way to go in the end. But the music has always been central for me. And these guys who mentored us really, taught us that, like it's about the music. That's why we go. Like, don't, fall for the rest of the scene. It's amazing to me that I still find versions of songs I've never heard, jams I never heard. This show has alerted me to so many great jams where I'm like, wow. I mean, David Gans played like a Saint of Circumstance jam that I was like, what is this? Where does this come from? So there's all this stuff that we have and everybody's sharing it together. And I love it.
Thanks, Pete. Well, before we go on to the last song of the finals, last but not least, Davis, how did you get into the Dead? And how did you end up, teaching this course? Connect the dots for us, please.
Yeah, I'm not so sure I know how those dots are connected, but I grew up outside of Allentown, Pennsylvania. And I kind of was really into, Led Zeppelin when I was in 6th grade. And then I discovered Pink Floyd and I sort of appreciated the early trippy Syd Barrett stuff a lot. And somebody that I was sort of friends with, but not close friends with, gave me, I think it was American Beauty on a copied cassette. And I spent a lot of time listening to it solo on my Walkman, mowing the lawn or taking a walk down by the river. I have these very vivid memories of the river and listening to Broke Down Palace, while the river is rolling. And so you get all of those kind of pleasures of youth, metonymic connections. And I just something about it started to grow on me. And then I got a CD player, my first CD player in 1988 or something, whenever that was. And I bought Live Dead. And I remember it had this digital readout and, it would almost like a clock show you how much time it elapsed on the CD. I put it on before I go to bed across the room. And sometimes I'd fall asleep, 4 minutes into Live Dead. And then I'd wake up in the middle of Death Don't Have No Mercy or Love Light. Or I guess you had to flip the CD. So whatever it was. But there was something about the timestamp and Live Dead and the timestamp and Dark Star, because before long, Dark Star launches you out of time. And it was almost like a Salvador Dali moment. The numbers would melt away. And I was just somewhere else. And so then I began to get some friends who were into it. And we'd go down to Quakertown and there was a place you could drop off blank tapes and get tapes and, all of that. And I only saw 2 Dead shows. And the reason I would be terrible as a contestant on the show, because for me, it's all the years combined. I'm terrible at disaggregating things. I can tell periods, but I don't have the ability that many of you have to locate into something. And I never wanted to know that. When I was a kid, I got one from the vault and I didn't know if that had been recorded a month ago or 20 years from now. It all just was smushed together for me. And that was part of the fun. It's all just one big kind of, endless experience, a river just flowing on and on. So we got tickets to a show at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. And I cannot remember if this was 91 or 92. We got our parents' permission, to drive there on a school night. I was 16, whatever it was. So we went down and it was every kid in our school knew that the 5 of us were going to see the Grateful Dead. It was not a huge Deadhead scene. And we are so excited, driving from Philadelphia, big adventure. And we get there and I'm just overwhelmed by the scene in the parking lot. And I'm so excited, endlessly excited. And we show our tickets and we walk in and I take about 5 steps in and I feel someone grabbing my arms and lifting me out of the venue. The tickets are for the next night. And the bouncer has removed us.
That's a
Can you imagine the letdown that came with this? It was terrible. Like, I don't even think we hang around in the parking lot. Like, we're defeated. Like, this is like an epic defeat. And we drive back to Allentown, head in hands. Our friend who had bought the tickets is feeling terrible. I think he even like bought everybody's ticket. And we do end up going like 6 months later to the Meadowlands, but we can't go to next night because half the guys in my group are on the school basketball team. And it's like their final the next night, the game. And we decide it's all for one and one for all. So we don't go. We're kind of the laughing stock, you know, like we missed out on this thing. And it was so terrible. But at the same time, it just like fed my desire to like reach the thing that you can never reach. Like when the clock was melting in my room, I'm trying to go somewhere. When we heard that bridge from Black Peter, I'm trying to go somewhere. And so often I can put the headphones on and I can still get to that place. Sometimes it's about nostalgia. I try to stay away from that a little bit. I think nostalgia is a little bit of a thing to be skeptical about. But for me, like the integration with the great American musical traditions is like so powerful that I feel like I can move through history, you know, Jackarow or Whiskey in the Jar or any of these things, and or be in a Miles Davis zone or be in a Sun Ra zone. And I love the ability to have everything combine and fuse together. And that's why I can't even remember what year it was that this happened to me or what day it was or anything about it. And that's okay because I don't want to disaggregate. I want everything to just be like fluid. And there's something about the dead that's so beautifully fluid that it's stayed with me every day of my life.
Wow. Why are you skeptical of nostalgia? Why do you like keep an eye on it?
Yeah. I used to write for the Huffington Post, and when Fare Thee Well was happening, I wrote a column or two about like beware of the nostalgia factor. I mean, maybe I'm a little too strong on this, but nostalgia is often about looking back. Like what propelled Reagan to his political power was nostalgia for an America that never was, right? Often nostalgia is used by reactionary forces to get you to believe that things used to be better some other time when if they were better, they were only better for some people. So I don't think the opposite, like we're moving always toward progress, because God knows the world is a mess. You know, I read the New York Times and want to cry every morning as I look at the headlines. But the feeling that like you go back and you lock yourself in the past, that's like a prison. The past is a prison. I can visit like an image. I can visit that river. I can visit that moment where the bouncer grabs me. And if I can do that in a way that I can see as part of the vivid and continuous stream that is my life now, that's great. But if I start to get off on that past trip, like I'm off the bus in, I think, a very unfortunate way. I try to avoid it.
Well put. Thank you, Davis. And thank you, Pete. We got one more song. Unless Ross can make up some ground, let's hear the third song of the finals.
Pour the wine for me and tighten up my shoes. I hate to leave you sitting there composing them old lonesome blues. It goes to show you don't ever know. Watch each card you play, children, and play it slow. Wait until that deal come round. Don't you let that deal go down, oh no.
Boy, Jared was feeling it on that, huh? Anytime he adds sugar into that, you know it's going well.
That was a rockin' deal at Providence Civic Center in Rhode Island on November 4th, 1979. Davis.
Yeah, so November 4th, 1979 is also the day of the beginning of the Iran hostage crisis, right? So you remember that the Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, take 52 diplomats and citizens hostages for 444 days. That sounds terrible. This is all triggered by the Iranian Revolution to overthrow the U.S.-backed Shah. They want Carter to apologize for U.S. interference in Iranian affairs. He refuses. And this goes back to Reagan again, right? They're only released when Reagan ultimately assumes the presidency. And, maybe, more than maybe, this is partially responsible for Carter being a one-term president. And of course, the dead had nothing to do with this and couldn't have known it was probably happening. Deal is the song, right? Because the whole thing is about a deal. I even, as I was doing a little research for this, I was like, well, what did the Egyptian government think about all this just because of the dead's trip to Egypt? And I won't take you down that rabbit hole, but Google it. It's really interesting, all of the international politics that go on around all of this. But it's also a reminder, and, that reminder you could apply to today's world that you may be having a good time listening to music, but the world's got a lot of people in it, and a lot of things are happening all around. And there's all these questions about ethics and responsibility. Even Ross, you're touching on it when you saw something, that made you feel like maybe I shouldn't do this anymore, right? Like you weren't getting something out of it. But I heard in what you were saying even more that, maybe there was something a little icky about the whole proposition. I don't know if I got that correctly.
I think that's fair.
I think that's just a thing to keep in mind. I also realize I didn't answer your question fully, Mike, about how I ended up teaching the course, but it relates back to this as well, which is, so as I said, I'm a William Burroughs scholar, which is not a thing that would be taught really in colleges all that much. But for me, to get out of the suburbs, my escape plan was the Grateful Dead, Franz Kafka, William Burroughs, forbidden books, anything that the suburbs didn't want. I live in the suburbs now and I love it, but anything that the suburbs didn't want me to have is what I wanted. But, I'm a professor. I'm not someone who dropped out of society. I never toured with the dead. I never was more than an observer in a way. I admire anybody who did it, but it never even occurred to me that I could take a summer and do that. It wasn't even a heuristic that I can understand. But I think from observing, what is the meaning of all of this? That's what led me to say, what would it be like to do it in an academic setting? And I try to do it in a way that doesn't turn it into something so terribly boring and overanalyzed that it takes all the fun and magic out of it. So I do the cultural criticism, and my partner, Richard Pettengill, who's an amazing musicologist, does, the music stuff. And he brings in his replica Jerry guitar, and he's like, this is how this is happening. And it's a great experience for the students. And we try to fuse together, I think, the feeling of what is it with a little bit of analysis about what it means, just to kind of give shape to some very complicated times that the band lived through and we've all lived through. And what represents that more than deal on the day that a lot of people were taken hostage overseas?
Beautiful button. Thank you. Ross got exactly 79. Nice pull, Ross, but Pete guessed 80. So Pete's the final champ of season 2 of Guess the Year. Way to go, Pete. But Ross, we'll go to you first. Why 79?
I might have gone a little earlier, except that if I hadn't heard Brent at the last second. I don't know. Jerry sounded strong on guitar and on vocals that it almost had to be 70s. Yeah, 79.
And Pete, why 80?
Basically what Ross said. I mean, Jerry sounded really strong. As I said to you guys right after it, I was like, that is a swinging deal. I love November, December 79. I'm surprised I didn't think 79 there. I think Brent's organ was throwing me a little bit later. And so I kind of hedged and said, I'm going to throw 80. Jerry just sounded way too young for it to be post 81. There wasn't a chance, right? So that's kind of why I picked 80. Thank you. Nice pick, Davis, by the way.
Thank you.
Really good.
Yeah, Davis, thank you for all these great picks. Thanks for all your insight. I'm wondering, and I'm sure everyone's wondering, is there a central Davis Schneiderman hub?
You're kind to ask. If you just sort of Google me, you'll come up with what a stupid word, Google. If you Google me, you'll all the dumb things we have to say in this technological age. You'll find a lot about it. If you look me up at Lake Forest College and do AI, you'll find more about the grant, or the Krebs Center for the Humanities, which is just a really beautiful place where we're trying to keep the humanities in focus as a relevant thing for our students. That's what we're talking about here today. Oh, I have a website too. If you davidschneiderman.com, you can check it out. It's kind of oriented right now to AI, but I do a lot of avant-garde or experimental or innovative writing and performance art and other things of that kind. For a while, I was the provost here at the college. So I'm kind of like everywhere, as you might be able to tell in my interest, which is part of the fun. And sometimes I got to remind myself to like focus on one thing for a little while. And this has been a lot of fun because I don't think I've sat still for an hour and something in a long time and just like had a deep conversation with all these really interesting, wonderful people. This has been like immensely enjoyable.
Thank you, Davis, for us too. And yeah, guys, such a great hang. CJ, Skelly, thanks for hanging out. And Ross and Pete, great run. It's been a total pleasure. I really appreciate everyone roping off time. Great chat. Thank you. All right. Thanks so much for listening. Again, go to guesttheyear.net for more information on the bar trivia event, which is this Saturday, May 18th, and then the following Saturday, May 25th, at Brooklyn Bowl, Las Vegas from 1 to 3 p.m. Doors are at noon. Come early, hang out. I'll be there hosting. Look forward to seeing people. It's a hang. It's not about winning, although winning's cool, but, you know, bar trivia, the idea is just hang out with friends and getting in discussions and meeting other deadheads who like thinking about the dead this way. So that's what I hope happens. Appreciate everyone spreading the word. Thank you to Davis. Again, all of this is Davis's links are in the show notes. And thank you to Green Mountain Bluegrass and Roots Festival. Again, it's in Manchester, Vermont. John and Jill, appreciate you both. Such a cool event. Kind of the way festivals should be going in my mind. There has to be an answer to going through 4 levels of security to buy a tin can Budweiser for $24. So it seems like John and Jill are taking care of that for us. Really appreciate it. All right, for all the show links, including our YouTube channel, go to guesttheyear.net. If you want to be a contestant on the show for season 3, sponsor the show or make comments and ask questions, email us at info@guesttheyear.net. Shout out to Dylan for drawing so many show posters, and James and Jack for helping out behind the scenes. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to the amazing tapers whose recordings made this show possible. Congratulations to Pete. We'll see him for the first episode of season 3, as well as in the Tournament of Champions. And to the other contestants, thanks for playing. And remember, it's all one song anyway.
And I bid you good night, good night, good night. And I bid you good night, good night, good night.